Good morning, everybody. As Sandra just said, my name is Jesper Frederiksen. I am with Okta here, and together with our good friends from Box, we have the pleasure of supporting this event here today. And before I go in and cover this topic here, sort of give you our point of view of what's happening out in the world, what are we seeing around digitization, let me just give a few words on why we are speaking on this topic here today. For those of you who haven't come across Box or Okta before, we are one of the sort of the new kids on the block, so to say. We were born in the cloud, created about 8-9 years ago to actually solve two very different problems. Box came after the enterprise content management, sharing and collaboration, and working across company, inside the company and across companies to share content. And Okta tried to solve a different problem, which was the very old identity and access management problem, but in a cloud world where suddenly we have identities and applications in many different places, hosted at many different providers. So over the last 8-9 years, we've been working with a lot of you guys here, a lot of your peers across the world, and try to figure out how do we help bridge this gap of old legacy technology with all of the new demands. And it's in that context I'm speaking this morning, just to share some of our experiences, what we've seen out there. And certainly, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I think we live in extremely interesting times where the pace of these changes we have to cope with are just going through the roof. So I think there's enormous opportunity for all of us, personally and business-wise. But there's also some pretty scary challenges out there that we all got to wake up and react to. So before going into sort of what we see today and very specific on the topic of digitization, it's probably also worth just looking back in history, actually go many years back and see what has happened before. We talk a lot about the change in society. We cannot open a newspaper or turn on TV without hearing robotics are going to put us all out of work. What are we going to do? But actually, this is not the first time we're going through a period of rapid transformation. A lot of you may have heard this new phrase, the fourth industrial revolution. It was coined by the people at the World Economic Forum. So that's probably a good starting point, saying if what we're going through right now is the fourth revolution, what's before that and what have we learned from the past? And actually, let's see if this thing works. It does. If we go way back in time, and we're now back to about the 1300, that's when the first revolution, so to say, business-wise happened, the commercial revolution. And what triggered that really was the emergence of sail ships and lots of technology that made it much easier to go a long distance, navigate with a far higher degree of certainty, so the emergence of proper maps and so on. And that basically enabled a massive change in society. We could travel out to the world. We could bring home new goods and foods and so on. And quite frankly, we could go out and colonize big parts of the world. So again, that was a transformational event, but it was also one that played out over like a 400-year period. So not exactly change at the pace that we are familiar with today. But nonetheless, it laid the foundations of the society we live in today. So a pretty important one. And then at the tail end of the commercial revolution, we started to get into the next one, which is where we get into the industrial revolution again. Right here in the UK was the heart of it. And what really triggered it was the steam generation and the fact that suddenly we could build steam engines where the capacity grew 10x in capacity over a very short period of time. So sort of from about 1750 and the next 80 years or so, that's really when we started to build machine tools. We started to figure out how to handle cotton and produce materials for clothing, etc. We made dramatic improvements in how to produce and fold and manage products of iron. And really, we set out the railway revolution, which again connected big parts of the country, not just here in the UK, but across the world. So again, laid the foundation of many of the businesses, quite frankly, that are still dominant today. So that takes us to the second revolution in commerce and business. And then a few years in, right after the Second World War, in 1949, the first microtransistor was invented. And that really kicked off the revolution that all of us still are living in and living off, quite frankly. because that was the sort of the initial foundation for the technology revolution. So the transistor gets invented in '49, and then in the next 20 years or so, down deep in Silicon Valley, we see all the guys from Fairchild and Intel start to tinker around and build the microprocessor, which really laid the foundation for what we're doing here today. I think Sandra talked before about, or I think when she was introduced, the fact that we've been in technology for 20 plus years. I actually worked selling some of these stuff when the Mac was introduced in '84, and again another sort of breakthrough moment in my opinion. But if you look at where we are today, we're still very much right in that technology revolution in my opinion, and obviously it's made tremendous impacts on all our lives. But it's also created some problems and some headaches that, again, if you walk the halls out here, one of the big themes, of course, will be cybersecurity. So we've solved some enormous problems. We've introduced huge productivity gains, but we've also created a whole new category of risk, both for us as consumers, but also for businesses. And as we've seen in the last couple of years, even around elections and so on, around societies. So lots of fun stuff happening with the computer revolution. And then, of course, people say, well, if we're still dealing with all of this, and if that's keeping us busy from 8 in the morning to 7 at night, what's this new thing hitting us? What's the fourth industrial revolution? We've got enough to do here. And the new revolution, so to say, if you listen to what the good people at the World Economic Forum and other clever people are saying, this revolution is actually not just one technology, but it's sort of a conglomerate of changes coming together all at once. One, of course, is the emergence of, or the massive advances being made around robotics and drones and sort of technology that can really, on scale, replace human beings. So if we look at how we can produce things today, we have today the opportunity to replace manual labor in many, many areas. That's not really new. We've been doing that in the car manufacturing factory and so on for a long time. We can just do it in much broader now. But of course, the really big thing, and I think what's causing all the debate in society, is we're not just going after manual labor right now. The emergence of deep learning, AI, basically means that even if you're a doctor or a lawyer or you are in a highly specialized, highly educated area, we can now unleash technology that has the capability and capacity to go in and learn and perform highly sophisticated pieces of work. Then you can throw in Internet of Things, the connection of every possible device. I'm sure a lot of you guys or girls here will have Apple Watches or Fitbits or whatever, right? So even us as human beings are now connected to the Internet. Then we have the cyber currencies, we have blockchain. We have all of these things, and perhaps the biggest one that very few of us are still even worrying about is the emergence of nanocomputing. So when we heard about what's happening or what happened in the past with the current sort of bit technology, a 0 and a 1, that's how our current computers work. With what is happening on the nanotechnology front and nanocomputing, we're now at the very, very early phases of a new revolution that will not just implement Moore's law where we're doubling capacity every 2 years, but exponentially increase the computing capacity. So I think when we sit here in 3 or 4 years' time, we will already then be looking at computing technology that has powers and capabilities on a completely different scale. So I think the digital revolution is the coming together on all of these things, and then think about if you combine these in clever ways, as a lot of smart startups and businesses are doing, you can do some amazing things. And really, I think, in my experience and in my mind, that's what's challenging every single business. We cannot, regardless of what industry we're in, we cannot just sit back saying, yeah, but it doesn't matter because I'm in shipping or I'm in retail or I'm in whatever. Regardless of industry, we will now be impacted by these things. And we as IT and technology people will have to find a way of supporting the business in coping with these changes because they're coming. And if we are not adapting to them and implementing them in our business, someone will take it to us, and they may not even be from our industry, but they will be driving this agenda and this revolution into our business. So if you think of what we just saw here about these 4 revolutions and how they played out over time, the first one, as we talked about, the maritime and the commercial revolution, played out over about 400 years. The industrial one was about 100. The technology, you could argue, is still happening and has probably been going on for 50, 60 years. But everything in what we're seeing in society is basically speeding up. I think we all feel that in our lives, that we're just operating at a much higher clock speed right now, and we're expected to operate at a much higher clock speed. So it doesn't matter what you see, that you're seeing this acceleration trend in anything. You're seeing the big cities of the world become much, much bigger, much quicker. So population is coming together, and they're coming together at a rapid, accelerating pace. We're seeing, quite frankly, population of the world accelerating again. We're now at, what, 7 billion, and there's no sign of this slowing down. On the contrary, it's actually still accelerating. We're seeing, hey, this morning, right, we walk here and it's not exactly a cold winter morning. We see even temperature change accelerating, and what does that do to our society? So there's all these factors around us that keep accelerating and impact our both personal lives and business lives. But of course, it's not all bad news, so you can argue some of these changes here are troubling, and we need to deal with them as societies. But there's also very good pieces of accelerating technologies that are helping us. So if you look at health technologies and our ability to cure cancer and a lot of other diseases, we're basically seeing again the technology grow at an exponential pace and bringing massive benefits to us. And then of course, if you look again closer to home in our function as IT, certainly one of the things we have to deal with every single day is just the basic information storage. So all of this happening around us, all of these technologies coming together just mean that whether we like it or not, we will have to do much, much more. And we will have to, again, cope with an exponential growth in what we have to compute and manage and store. And guess what? We're probably not going to get an exponentially growing budget. So we have to find every single day a way of doing these things smarter and better, because if not, we're going to run into the wall, basically. So I love to observe what's happening in the world and how sort of companies are competing and moving and building ecosystems and collaborating one day, and next day you turn around and they're competing. And certainly, if you look, again, I would argue, regardless of what business you're in, you're also seeing an accelerating pace of change in your industries. Forget about technology, just who's entering what, who's doing what, who's working with whom. The markets are changing far, far faster than ever before, and competition is just more intense. There are no borders anymore. What Facebook, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and these guys can do is boundless and limitless. There is no place on earth they will not go if they see an attractive opportunity. So reality is just that we have new entrants coming in. They have all unlimited funding, as we've seen. Even a startup like Uber, who's never made a profit in his life, is now worth 60 billion and has raised $8 to $9 billion. So anyone with a good idea, a compelling story, and a vision can go out and attract unlimited capital. I don't know if you saw the other day here, now Tesla announced a big electric truck. And again, here's a company that lost $2 billion, and they're still just powering ahead and going after big challenges and opportunities. And even though Mr. Musk has never made a profit, his company is still worth more than Ford. So we have these weird dynamics in the world, and again, we in our businesses just have to accept it. The one thing that's certainly very interesting is this notion of ecosystems. You used to have long-term partnerships where people would collaborate, but certainly we're seeing these ecosystems break down more and more. I read an interesting article on the train in this morning. I'm Danish, so back in my home country, Denmark, we have the national sort of business beacon of pride and hope is Maersk, the shipping line, and you would always think, hey, Maersk, who can possibly challenge those guys? Well, the story now is that at the recent board meeting, or annual shareholders meeting, the #1 competitor that Maersk on stage talks about is Amazon. So even though you're a shipping company who's got the biggest container ships in the world, they're basically saying, Amazon is now building their own shipping company. They don't need airlines anymore. They don't need Maersk anymore. They got the capital to go out and build their own fleet of planes or boats or ships or whatever. So whatever system we're in, wherever we have suppliers or business partners, we have to keep in mind that we may be great friends today, but they also have an opportunity to go in and expand their footprint in the value chain. And then, of course, we have our good friends in Brussels and elsewhere who are very good at coming up with lots of helpful regulation that makes sure that how do we cope with all of this? Well, we obviously got to protect our privacy. We got to make sure that consumer data, business data is taken well care of. So I'm not suggesting that these regulations are wrong or incorrect or anything. They're there, and whether we like them or not, we have to cope with them. So even forget about all the business pressures and technology pressures. We also have the legislative bodies in the UK and Europe and all over the world who's creating more headache for us. And again, we have to react. There is no renegotiation of the GDPR go live date next May. It's going to happen, and we have to cope with it. And then last but not least, think of your own lives, right? While all of this is happening as consumers, we are more fickle than ever, right? We have the attention span of a 2-year-old. Our mobile phones have taught us that. If we don't get good service right now, we're off. We won't be bothered, right? So that's the context we're operating against, that we just have to adapt and cope with a consumer and a business customer that has completely different expectations. I was moving my bank account a few weeks ago because, side story, go read our blog, my identity was breached. So I also figured out the downside of a digital world where suddenly I have 5 new bank accounts I didn't know of. Not a fun experience. So I decided to go change my bank. The number one decision criteria for me in choosing my new bank is not whether they have a branch close to me or whether they got a good brand or whether they sponsor the rugby. The number one decision criteria for me is how good is their online banking. That's the number one thing I worry about. Do they have a cool mobile app that I like using? And do I think that it's secure and they're taking good care of it? All the rest, all the nonsense, couldn't care less. Give me a good app. That's what I make my decisions on as a consumer now. So that's some of the context. This is what we got to deal with. This is what your CEO and CFO, and this is the context they live in. Last week I was down in Barcelona at the Gartner Symposium, and one of the opening keynotes I thought asked a really provocative questions, and I'm going to throw it out here as well. And it basically was a similar story saying there's all of this stuff happening, and at the board level in your organizations, they're dealing with this. And we got to ask ourselves the question, if for whatever reason, tomorrow they had to go out and rehire for your position, would they hire you? Do we have the skills and the mindset to go and deal with these things? Because that's what we got to do for our companies. We got to step up and help them be able to cope with all of these changes. That's just reality. We cannot say, yeah, but it's not really going to happen. We're just going to look after the old stuff down in the basement. No, if that's our tactic, we're going to have a career problem here. So there was this saying a long time ago, and this is probably why your CEO and CFO and so on is worried about this. Mark Andreessen, the guy who founded Netscape, came up with a very famous article 6 or 7 years ago, which is called "Software is Eating the World," basically saying it doesn't matter what physical assets you have, you are going to get exposed to technology and software that'll challenge it. And the best way of looking at how that's playing out and why this is now a board level priority is just look back in time saying which companies are worth the most in the world right now. If we go back in time, good old-fashioned technology, IBM on the top, mainframe down in the basement, AT&T, cables all around the US, good old-fashioned oil, 2 of them, actually 3, Schlumberger would be oil as well. Those were the top 5 most valuable companies in the 80s. 90s, IBM still on top, still some oil. General Electric, again, one of the most iconic industrial companies in the world, and throw in some tobacco, and now again, most valuable companies. 10 years later, GE on top of the world. We got some pharma, we got a bank, we got Cisco creeping up here. So we're seeing a bit of what I would call the newer technology on the stack. Notice here, IBM is no longer on the list here. 2010, only 7 years ago. Oil still on top. We got the 2 big ones. We got Berkshire Hathaway, the greatest investor on the planet, and GE is still up there. If we look today and go and see who has the highest market cap, 5 big technology companies. And all of these guys, by the way, are sitting, Apple is sitting on $200 billion of cash. There's nothing they cannot buy in this world if they decide that they want to go after this opportunity. So that's why every business, regardless of industry, got to wake up and compete with these guys. And that's not always easy. So I believe, and I think everyone is reaching the conclusion that it doesn't matter what industry we are in, we are or we have to become a technology company. That is a core requirement and part of our DNA. We have to do this if we want to compete and thrive in this new world. And again, what are people doing to become that? And again, a lot of the vendors outside will be very happy because people are, of course, piling in saying, we gotta get into this arms race. We cannot rely on old technology. So one of the big sort of trends, of course, is we're adopting cloud technologies at a very, very fast pace because we cannot work in a world where we roll out a new release every 3 years. We got to get on a higher frequency of innovation and new technology. That's why Amazon is doing so well providing compute power. That's why Salesforce came about. That's why Workday, that's why Box, that's why Okta is thriving, because we are providing technology at a much higher pace in the cloud. The mobility revolution, we all know about that. IoT, you can ask different people. Some people will say 20 billion, some people will say 50 billion. It doesn't really matter. It's a big, big number. They are going to get connected. They'll be spitting off data that we got to capture and be able to react to. And of course, we're going to do that by becoming big data experts. So that's some of the technology context that we just got to accept and participate in and figure out how we're going to leverage in our business. And then if we look back again, and we don't need to look that many years back, life used to be fairly simple in technology, right? We would have 2 or 3 big providers. We would spend a couple of years figuring out, are we going to bet on Oracle financials? Are we going to bet on SAP? And then we're going to build the whole stack around those guys. We'll pick 1 or 2 standard pieces of hardware. We'll call Checkpoint. They'll sell us some firewalls. We'll put a perimeter up around our business, and off we go. And then we would patch the Microsoft systems 2 or 3 times per year, and we would do a big database upgrade every 4 or 5 years. That wasn't too hard. That's what we had to cope with in the past, and that was manageable. Reality today, of course, is that technology stack is still there. I would argue very few companies have turned that off. Sure, startups like an Okta or a Box or whatever, we probably build another technology stack, a newer technology stack, but most large businesses I work with still have that stuff down in the basement, and it's still very much focused on the stakeholders here in the middle, the employees. But the others, of course, we still now also have to open up our enterprise to do all the things we talked about before, to partner effectively, to build an ecosystem, to leverage these new pieces of technology. We have to connect our partners, our contractors, our customers, and our suppliers. So we cannot rely on that monolithic sort of fence around our business, rely on a simple firewall piece of technology to secure us. Those days are over. We have to be able to connect not just people, but also APIs and make sure that we can interface. So at Okta, we believe that people today is the only meaningful perimeter that you need to worry about. So as you figure out how to protect your enterprise and manage it effectively, you have to start with the individual and the identity, because that's the only constant in this business. You don't know where they are. They could be hired by you. They could be contracted by you. They could work for a supplier. You don't know where they are physically, meaning they can be inside your firewall, they can be traveling, they can be here at a conference, they can be at home. They still expect to have the same level of service and access. So that's one of the security challenges you have to deal with, and quite frankly, that's what created the business for Okta to go in and solve this problem. So that's certainly one piece of advice to enable and facilitate all of the things that needs to be done technology-wise. This is one of the conversations you need to have. And again, we talked about this. Why? Because you got all of this stuff out there, and whether you know it or not, or whether you like it or not, the other thing that certainly we are seeing is that in most large businesses, we will go in and say, okay, how many cloud technologies do you use? And the CIO will say, well, we only have 3 cloud apps. And then when you go around the business and speak to people, you'll realize that departments are doing stuff all over the place. There will be WebEx, there will be DocuSign, there will be Amazon, there will be Google Compute, there will be whatever. It's out there, it's in your business, and whether you like it or not, again, you have to cope with it and you have to figure out how to enable and secure it. So that's just the reality we live in, this mixed, very heterogeneous, decentralized environment where we got to figure out a better way of managing it. So the big question, of course, is how do you do all of this? What do we need to do in IT? And certainly, again, I took the liberty of borrowing this from a great presentation at the Gartner Symposium. This was presented by the global CIO from Siemens and talked about how they're doing this. So this is basically his view of the world, basically saying we cannot forget about the old technology stack. We still have to run the mainframe and the network and do all of these things that run our factories and our supply chain and so on. We have to do that, but we have to do it with fewer people and far less cost. So we have to simplify, standardize, and optimize it so that we can do that basic technology at a much lower cost and overhead. It has to be done because that's the only way we can free up people and money and budgets to go and do all the new cool stuff that our businesses will expect from us. So this is why you hear Gartner talk about this concept of bimodal IT, two-speed IT. We have to do the good old-fashioned block and tackling on the core infrastructure systems, and then we have to free up energy and mind power, passion and people and funding to go and help the business do all the new things. So that, in my experience, is the big challenge for us in the room here, to do these things and do them at the same time. One thing I haven't covered in this presentation, because it's probably a topic all on its own, actually, my experience is the hardest thing about all of this is not even technology. It's about people and change management. Because if you have a technology function and you've been doing this for very effectively for 30 or 40 years, now suddenly you come in and saying these waterfall development models, the 2-year release cycle, and forget all about that. Now we're on Agile, now we're doing 2 weeks release cycles, now we're doing design thinking. It's like a brain reset. So I think as you go and embark on this work, the technology piece is critical, but people and DNA and sort of mentality is probably even more important. So do not underestimate and do not forget that in your projects and transformational programs at home. So these are some of the things in my experience, what we're seeing at our customers, we got to deal with. Users expect more. I mean, if someone presented me with an AS400-like screen at work, I would probably quit. I would just say, I'm not doing it, right? This is not how I work, right? Give me a modern UI, give me something I can work with, give me mobility. That's what I expect, and hey, I'm not exactly a millennial. I think if you hire guys and girls out of university, they're probably 10 times worse than I would be. So we just got to cope with it, and we got to enable them, and I think that's where our friends Box have done such an outstanding job. They will collaborate by default. They will find a way of working with external partners, with external customers or suppliers, whatever, and we got to do that securely. So again, look at technology that has that in its DNA. The IT organization, of course, the whole security piece, we're not going to sort of beat that horse to death. I think we all realize it's out there and we got to do something about it. So if there's one piece of advice we give to every single organization is the single easiest low-cost security fix you can do is go implement two-factor authentication. More than 80% of all security breaches, including some of the most well-known ones like the recent one from was the Equifax in the US that wiped off billions and billions of dollars of market cap. Why? Because administrator credentials were breached and there was no two-factor authentication. If there's one thing you can do that is not going to ruin anyone, is solve that problem and raise the security bar very, very easily and very quickly. You can score a quick win and increase your security posture. And then another thing that we could talk all day around this, the modern service concept is also not just about people, but about APIs. So everything you do in your business needs to be API enabled because that's the way we can leverage the ecosystems. That's the way we can connect effectively. So again, worry about not just collaborating and securing businesses and traditional applications, but also the APIs and the programmatic interfaces into your organization. So what do we think? And of course, this is no big secret. We are probably slightly biased given we live off this. We believe that a core ingredients as you go out and figure out how to re-architect for the future is to make sure that whatever you do, whatever you build, it has collaboration sort of in its DNA. We will be in a world where we consistently will be buying parts of the business, selling parts of the business, partnering. So we have to be able to collaborate effectively across the boundaries of our company. I believe that the days of going out and buying an SAP platform, running a 5-year implementation project to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars are over. I don't think it's going to happen again. I think very few companies will do that size of monolithic application implementation. I do think that businesses will go out and say, I'm going to take Workday and I'm going to couple it with Salesforce. I have some Microsoft stuff. I'm using SAP for my core financials, and I will find a way of integrating those. So I think we're actually back to a best-of-breed reality where we have to, from a technology perspective, be able to cope with that and be able to manage that in our business. And a lot of these pieces of technology will sit outside the firewall on the cloud. I'm sure that even, again, if we meet here 20 years from now, we will still run many of the core, very critical production processes inside our business, but the vast majority of non-critical stuff, if it's not already outside the firewall, it certainly will be. And then last but not least, we cannot forget the security piece. This is probably an existential threat to any business. If we do this wrong, someone is going to exploit it, and we're going to end up, if not on the front page, then certainly with the GDPR fine. So we just got to keep that in mind as we go out and do this. Find a security architecture and a platform that will enable you to do all of this. So that's sort of the punchlines from what we're seeing. We believe that a key priority for businesses out there is to figure out how to manage, secure, and collaborate across the extended enterprise. That is what is expected of us today. And of course, coming back to the fickle and demanding consumer, we just got to give people a user experience that not just they like and they can accept, but one they love, because that's actually what will drive consumer behavior in my experience. So with that in mind, I will round up here. I will hope you have a very successful day. I think go out and think about what can you do technology-wise to delight your users, make them happy about what you do, make them come up to you in the lift saying, thank you, I like that new piece of technology you roll out. Go out and engage with the business, go out and engage with the executives as they embark on this digital journey. And of course, remember that there's some nasty people out there, and make sure that whatever we do, we keep the infrastructure secure. Thank you.